Good afternoon. How you guys doing today? My name is Scott Kidder, and I serve as the Vice President of Sales and Business Development for Harmony Healthcare IT. It's my pleasure to be with you all today. So at Harmony Healthcare IT, we partner with organizations to help them decommission legacy systems and secure that legacy data that lives inside of those systems. If you've been through many of these security sessions throughout today, there's been a lot of interesting topics covered, but we are going to provide something a little bit different. So rather than a comprehensive security plan, we're going to focus on one item that's very simple yet effective to help everybody with their security, to help close any loopholes that might be there around these legacy systems. So here's a sample of some recent headlines throughout the past year. You're sitting in a security session at a healthcare conference, so most of you, this probably should not come as any big surprise, but if by chance you haven't been reading the news in this industry lately, it may come as some surprise that the healthcare industry is the number one most cyber-attacked industry in 2017, and it was ranked among the top 6 in 2016. So I'm assuming that's no shock to anybody here. I learned that a medical record, and I heard somebody say this in the last presentation, is worth 50 times more than a credit card on the black market today. So maybe you've heard that before. Have you guys heard that stat? I found it a little shocking myself, so I had to Google it, and if I found it unbelievable, frankly, and once I looked it up, it was confirmed. So look that up if you have questions around that, but that's kind of interesting to take that in a little bit. You also may know that the Department of Health and Human Services requires that any breach that includes over 500 records must be reported publicly. There were 234 of those breaches just in last year alone, and it affected 4.3 million medical records. That's a lot. Most of you probably have heard the stories or may even know somebody who encountered a breach. Another shocking stat as we were putting together this white paper was that over 90% of hospitals have had some level of a breach. Now, it doesn't mean that they had over 500 and had to report it publicly, but at some level there's been an incident that put them at risk to do that. So what's the impact of that? These attacks are costing our industry a significant amount of time and money to defend ourselves against those. It's all adding up. So what does that mean? So if you've been here through some of these sessions earlier today, you heard a lot about this: ransomware, third-party attacking, phishing attacks, employee errors. As I mentioned before, rather than cover all of those, we're going to cover with you guys a pretty easy and simple thing you can do around all of these legacy systems. Given that you are an audience of security professionals, I am a sales guy, and I am not the best suited to address any questions you have around this. So I'm going to invite up here to join me a member of our team, our CIO and Privacy and Security Officer, my colleague, my friend, Rick Adams.
Scott asked a couple of questions. I'd like to understand a little bit better. Who in the audience today, with a raise of hands, has security within their organization as their prime responsibility? A few. Who has security responsibilities but has other responsibilities as part of their job? Pretty common. Who has no idea why they're even in this session and their feet were just tired and they're sitting here? You? Dave. Okay. Well, good. No, that helps me understand the audience a bit, and that's pretty common that we see in most organizations. You're seeing more and more people who are dedicated to security within the organizations, which is exciting. We're starting to see that take hold a lot. One of the things that I like to do is we talk about these legacy systems, and as Scott said, we're not going to try to spend a bunch of time and talk about phishing and training of your staff and all of those things that you probably all have to work with on a daily basis. We're going to focus and target on one thing, which is legacy applications. And this is a very, very important topic and subject that we're on today, and it's something that our industry needs to get a handle on. If you took, there's a citing in our white paper that there's a link to within this brochure that mentions it, and they cite that the dealing with the data in legacy applications for security executives today in the last survey was a top, if not the top concern or focus that they were going to have. We're still fighting to see that, but that's what the surveys are starting to show. So I want to kind of walk through some of the vulnerabilities that we see that are specific in the legacy applications and why it makes sense to do things other than to try to leave those applications out. So one of the things is unencrypted data in transit. A lot of the legacy apps are still running on really, really old technology. And yeah, we actually still see some that are running on WISE 60 terminals running RS-232 serial communications. That's not uncommon. I mean, we do see it. Those are getting less and less, but that does happen. There's really not a whole lot that you can do to button that down. Unsupported operating systems, probably one of the biggest things that we see is, a good example would be an application running on Microsoft Windows 2003. You can't get patches for it. There's really not a whole lot that you can do except ride what level it's at today, and I guess cross your fingers and hope for the best. That you don't have issues with that particular operating system. Insecure legacy applications. So even if it's on a more secure operating system, it's not uncommon in these applications for them to not have the back-end features and functions that you're required by a lot of your common security frameworks, whether that's NIST or high trust or whatever it is that you're trying to abide by, and you have specific requirements. That app may not be able to meet those requirements, and you can't meet it any other way. That could be anything from audit logs to password strength and resets and screen locks and those types of things that are application specific. What do you do, right? If you've got that app out there and you can't meet those things and there's no other workaround to get it done. Outdated security protocols, you'll see that also. Somebody's on an older operating system and it's TLS 1.0 or whatever the security protocol is for the data in transit, and your app it's going to auto-negotiate down to whatever your application is. I mean, we could go through probably 30 or 40 of those types of things, but they're all over the place in these legacy applications. Probably one that a lot of security folks don't want to discuss, and that's unregulated backdoor access. We see a lot, we do a lot of archiving in places that have systems from acquisitions, so they're bringing in 15 or 20 of these legacy applications from a practice or a clinic or even or a hospital and a series of apps that they acquired. There's not uncommon for the people in that other organization to have built backdoors into it, and sometimes they're really, really hard to detect, but somebody might be able to find and still have access through those backdoors. Sometimes those applications were self-developed by that organization, and they're really vulnerable because of that, and you have no access to the person who developed the application. As Scott stated a couple of minutes ago, I'm sure all of your organizations are taking a lot of measures to secure your environment. We also know that archiving of legacy systems may not be at the top of your list, right? But it should be. And I've made that statement a couple of times in interviews that I've had, and it really should be, because it's a straightforward, I was going to say simple, but it's a straightforward process to take a big piece of vulnerability out of your environment by bringing these legacy applications into one environment. I like to use the analogy of, think of all of your applications in your environment, not just the legacy applications, but think of your environment as a building. Think of your environment as a building. And in that building, you've got doors and windows and other openings in that building that you need to secure. If you've got 40 legacy applications and each one of those is an island or a building on its own, some of those doors don't have very secure locks on those doors. Some of them don't have any locks on the doors at all. Sometimes they're buildings you don't even know you have, and it's pretty hard to secure it when you don't even know that you have it. So take the other side of the spectrum and think about having one building with all of those in that building with one door that's a very, very secure door that you can button down and lock down. And that's what you can do if you take the move to retire all of those legacy applications and bring them into one infrastructure, one environment that's secure.
So what's the process? So you find, hey, I have these legacy systems. What do I do? How do I get them locked down, as Rick said, under better lock and key? So here's a little 4-step outline for you. So first of all, get an inventory. You probably have this already in many cases, but it's a matter of just, hey, not just what's the system and what's the name, but where does it live? Ask your teams, because likely these things seem to come out of the woodwork once you start asking these questions. People start putting their hands up and saying, I've got this system under the desk over here. We acquired this practice. So get that inventory together, clinical, financial, administrative, HR, whatever it is. And then second, do some basic discovery. What is that system? Do you know the name? Does anybody remember how to get into it? Do you know what the database is behind the scenes? Any information you can gather around that, and look and then third, prioritize it. There's going to be a number of things that drive this. A big item in many cases is support costs related to a legacy system. But when it comes to security, you're going to look at it and say, hey, that's a Windows 2003 server. I have to do something with that. I'm no longer allowed to power that up in my data center, or whatever those priorities are for your organization. Evaluate the risk for each of those systems and understand that. And then third, look for a vendor. I mean, that's what we do, but we're here today to give you guys tips and advice. And if we were, we would recommend you look for somebody who's high trust certified. That's a really important piece, especially when you're trying to secure data. You want to make sure you hire somebody who has the highest level of security to work with that data. And you want to look for somebody who has kind of a breadth of experience, somebody who can handle all these various systems. When you start getting under the covers of these things, you're going to find they're not all relational SQL databases, right? You're going to find, boy, these things are old on mainframes and mumps and DB2, and there's a lot of variety that's out there. So you want to look for somebody that kind of has that experience. So when you have those are 4 tips for you to do that. And when you solve this problem, we wanted to kind of leave you with this thought. It's not just solving security and minimizing the risk, as you can see in this first box, but there's a lot of additional benefits to getting these legacy systems cleaned up. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but of course you're going to reduce the cost associated with that legacy system, but you're also bringing data together that's in individual silos into one database so that you have that, and then you're simplifying access. So when you do this, your manager of your HIM department and your legal department and so forth, they're going to come to you and say, oh my gosh, thank you, because now instead of logging into 10 different systems or calling somebody in IT and hoping they have time to get to a query to pull out my data, they're able to go and access that simply and easily themselves. So just a few core additional benefits beyond the security items that we've mentioned here today. So that's it. That's our presentation for Rick and I, and we'll remain up here if you guys have any questions or if there's anything we can answer for you.
So what types of systems do you archive?
Good question. So what types of systems? So at Harmony, we can archive all types of systems. So our specialty is healthcare. That's where we grew up. That's where we live today. We have a sole focus on the healthcare industry, but hospitals are businesses too, right? So they have HR systems, they have accounting systems, they have any number of systems, and we can certainly take all that data. To us, as Rick likes to say, data's data, and if we can get to it and get it out, we can archive it. So great question, thank you, but really there's no limit to the types of systems that may be able to be archived. Well, thank you guys for coming, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you.